shall we start our conversation with a little bit about your process in general, and how did you become interested in writing for singers?
So my musical background, my sort of initial starting out point was as a bad pianist and also as a boy chorister. And one of the great things about the Anglican choral tradition that I grew up in is that there's such a huge history of this music, and it's kind of unbroken from the late 1400s until now. But it's so different than writing for solo voices. And so for a long time, all through Juilliard, I never really approached writing for solo voice because I was so terrified of it. And then eventually friends of mine started asking, oh, could you set this text? Could you write for this? And it was always these, I call them half commissions, because no money changes hands, and it's all done usually kind of at the bar. You discuss that, wouldn't that be fun? And then you email text back and forth. And it really grew out of collaborations with individual people. So it was never, I have this grand vision for a song cycle. It was more like, I want to write something for you.
See, now I would think it would be so much harder to write for an ensemble than for a solo voice. What was daunting about writing for a solo voice?
Well, I suppose it's such a, let me think. So the need to communicate text and the need to communicate sometimes story and the need to communicate a sense of emotional narrative, I think, is so much more direct and intimate with a human voice than it is with, for instance, an oboe, right? Where its abstraction is built into the concept, right?
Oh.
And one of the things that Bach is a great example where you have these large-scale pieces where there's a solo voice that does one kind of intimacy, and then it'll be answered by an instrument that does an entirely different kind of thing.
Okay.
But a solo voice with piano for me was just, it was just scary. The idea of being that, injecting the communication into the vein that directly.
And was it that voices are all different? Was that daunting to you?
Exactly.
What if this doesn't work for her or him, and I'll be found out or something? I'll feel like I don't know enough. Or
exactly.
Was there an anxiety about the individual singer?
There was, and to a certain extent, there's, with each individual, the question isn't, can you do this? Right, it's like, it's not a trick. It's not, can you, flip backwards, or can you hold your breath underwater for 20 minutes? It's more about, can you communicate while doing this? And that to me, again, felt like, so it's not about, do you have a high D or whatever. It's about what kind of story can you tell at that time.
Oh, that's amazing. So one of the things that I've always wondered about is, you see this vocal range chart. Soprano is whatever it is, A below,
right.
Middle C to high C or above, depending on the Fach, and the same for every voice type, right? So that's the thing that composers generally probably begin to work from when you're writing, but then of course we have all these other issues like tessitura,
right.
and individual comfort and timbre, et cetera. As you mentioned the sweet spot earlier.
Right.
So
she and I were talking about you guys.
Is that super different from writing for an instrumentalist?
It is, yeah. I mean, of course, there are similarities where, as a composer, you say, okay, the lowest note on the tuba is, or the highest note in the piccolo, and of course, you can always push it farther. But with the voice, you very quickly learn that it's not a range. It's not a staircase, right? It's one of those crazy Escher staircases where actually, depends on where you, define E flat, really. Is it an E flat where I've come to it this way, or I've come to it that way? It feels like sort of the weekend subway schedule, where there are all these kind of, you can't actually get there from here. You should probably just take an Uber.
Or I don't want to live on E flat.
Yeah, well, exactly.
I don't.
Well, that's exactly it. Where it's not a question. If you're a violinist, you can find the note and you can hang out there.
Yeah.
Whereas the idea that you have to prepare things, it's much more athletic in a lot of ways. Writing for the voice, I've learned, and I'm still learning every day. And one of the great things working with you, I'm sort of aiming at today, is realizing the extent to which it really is so individual. Like what is comfortable and what is, I don't want to say unnatural, but what's super easy and what takes effort. And each voice bears the trace of how much work it took to get to that point.